Hey guys, I heard your comments from last video and you guys really didn't like how loud the music was in contrast to my voice. So I decided to change that. Shut up! There we go. Time to play Pokemon Black on my DS. Maybe I should try turning on the C gear to see if I find any passerbys. I'm guessing wireless communications don't really work? Let me turn off and on my DS again and play without the C gear. What happened to my save file? Okay, I think I've gone over the trauma of losing my Pokemon Black save file. Time to play again. Wrong date or firmware expired? Oh, my R4 is a piece of shit. At this point, I'm very close to modding one of my 3DS systems. It may be risky, but I think it'll be worth it in the end. But how did we get here? You see, when you want to play your favorite game that you don't own anymore, you would typically look through online shopping sites like eBay to find a copy of the game. Then you realize that the game is in high demand and costs more than the system needed to play the game loose. What would you do before the knowledge of modding the system in question? A. Give in and pay that much for the game. B. Download and emulate the game. Or C. Use a flashcard. Our little fellow here wants to buy Pokemon Heart Gold for the DS, so he's going to look at these options to see what's best for him. He can't pick A since he hasn't saved up nearly enough money to buy the game. He doesn't want to pick B since it just feels wrong to play the game in an emulator, as he wants to feel like he's playing the real deal. Plus, he gets features that are impossible to replicate on emulator, like wireless functionality, and he can play the game on the go instead of in his room. His only other option he has is C, so he buys an R4 cartridge for really cheap. That's where we'll stop and take a disliking to flashcards for a second. Flashcards are surprisingly not as worth it during this point in time. The first issue is the time bomb. Very commonly seen in R4 cartridges, the time bomb will, in my words, internally destroy the cartridge, forcing you to get a new R4 cartridge with the current year labeled on it. This is an interesting strategy, but it doesn't help for people that just want to play games. These time bombs are super annoying, and they make these flashcards very likely to end up in the landfill. Hashtag save the environment from the R4 landfill. When my R4 firmware expired, it didn't come out with any expiration message, just a white screen, and after installing fresh software for the R4, it worked just fine, so it might not be the cartridge at fault for most of them. Let me know in the comments if it's the case for you. There are workarounds to defusing this time bomb, but if there has to be a workaround to an issue with a product, that product has failed at reliability. Before moving on to the next reason, I want to talk about my brother's 3DS. Last year, the home menu firmware stopped working on the 3DS, so we couldn't access the home menu. We could bring up the power options in the system update menu by pressing some button combinations. We tried resetting the system, updating the system, removing the battery and the microSD card, and tried modding the 3DS, but nothing worked. That 3DS was seriously soft bricked. We had to assume it was the R4 that did it, but it could have also been the microSD inside the 3DS. We weren't too sure what the issue was. Back on the topic of reliability, let's talk about the games themselves. Now, this isn't all centered on the R4, as some of these things can also happen on modded systems or emulators. Sometimes your saved data can just randomly corrupt, even without cheating. When you're using a flashcard, this may be due to the microSD card if you're using a bad one. Most listings for R4 cards come with a microSD, but it's very cheap and unreliable, so it's more prone to save corruption. So use a well-known branded microSD card if you plan on using a flashcard. Another issue with games is some features being locked. Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver cartridges are infrared, so they can pair to a Pokewalker. Reproduction cartridges and R4 cards aren't capable of such a thing, thus you can't use infrared capabilities in those games. Another example of incompatibilities is in Pokemon Black, White, and their sequels. I know, a lot of Pokemon games I'm talking about, but these games have Poke Transfer. And even though you can still use this feature even if your Gen 5 game is on an R4, your copy of Gen 4 can't be on an R4. That means, unless you have a legitimate copy of a Gen 4 game to trade the R4 Pokemon from, your Pokemon are stuck in the R4 forever until the time bomb goes off. Oh yeah, quick honorable mention to Black and White's anti-piracy measure where Pokemon can't gain experience. Didn't work because people found bypasses, but kinda worth noting. Finally, we have rarity, which doesn't apply to R4 cards at all. For this reason, we'll have to look outside of the DS. Our fellow here searches for GBA flashcards since he wants to play Pokemon Ruby or Sapphire, which he sees costs $100 loose. But upon looking, he realizes one dreadful thing. Even buying GBA flash cards is going to be an expense. The best GBA flash cards on the market are Easy Flash and EverDrive GBA cards, and they can sometimes go for more than Ruby or Sapphire loose. You could either go for those, or risk it all with these slightly less expensive ones from China, which might not work after a few months. This is just a theory. Let me know if these Chinese flashcards work for you finally. Now, just because modding is replacing the need for flashcards, that doesn't mean flashcards are going to die out permanently. As someone who was too afraid to mod their 3DS, I stuck with flashcards until I noticed that they had time bombs on them. There are probably a couple of people that don't want to switch to modding just yet and rely on flashcards and emulators since they're easy to set up and less risky for their DS. Overall, I can't see why a lot of people want to mod their 3DS now. Some games just get harder to come by every day, and some flashcards aren't reliable enough to be an option for some people. If one successfully mods their DS, they can put in as many games as they want and they'll run fine. Plus, they'll be able to play more than just DS games. And in the event of save corruption, there are tools out there that allow backups of save files. Even though some features still might not be fully accessible when putting a game onto a modded system, it is still better than a ticking time bomb. While I have never modded the 3DS out of fear that I might brick my own, I might try it out eventually on a 3DS I'm willing to risk it on. Another issue with games is being locked.